This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. As usual, I will ask if you find the podcast useful that you rate and review it in the Apple Podcast Store or wherever you get your podcasts. Last episode, I mentioned that my wife, Michelle, and I are going to record an episode. My wife very much is a believer still, and I've asked for questions. We've received several. You still have an opportunity in the next few weeks here to send me more questions. I will point out that I am looking for respectful questions about our relationship and how we handle things rather than trying to undermine her faith. Those I'm going to ignore entirely. I'm letting you know that now. Most of the questions have been very respectful and are interesting, and I think that's going to be an amazing episode. I'm looking forward to both recording it and to sharing it with you. Special thanks to Matthew Taylor for doing the editing of today's conversation. On to today's show. My guest today is Ray Gilford. What you need to know about Ray is if you know Ray, if you talk to Ray, if you spend any time with Ray, you love Ray. There's just no way around it. He is such a kind-hearted person. He's a very warm and gentle person. And so that makes his story even that much more powerful. Often the deconversion stories that we hear are from people who are strong atheists or at least methodological naturalists. In this case, Ray very much still believes in an afterlife. He calls himself a spiritualist, and he believes in metaphysics, in his words. As I point out in the episode, this is obviously different from my perspective, but why I think it's valuable is this. Many apologists argue that the assumption that miracles are impossible invalidates some of the criticisms that deconverts and atheists have towards Christianity. But in Ray, we have a person who doesn't assume that, and yet he still found Christianity lacking. If you hear Ray's story and you think to yourself that Ray did not do enough, I would challenge you on that point. Ray learned Hebrew, he learned Greek, he studied, he was looking for something deeper, and it was only when he didn't find that in Christianity that he began a deconversion process. Generally on the podcast, I don't tear down Christianity directly. I'll refer you back to my conversation with Dr. Pinn, where we discuss the difference between religion and theism. In this case, my discussion with Ray is really directly about Christianity and its specific problems of not fulfilling its promises. So if this feels a little bit on the attack from me, my apologies. Please keep in mind the broader perspective that I have of being a humanist and a secularist and a pluralist. I don't think Christianity is unique in its failures to live up to its promises. A major component of Ray's story is the predatory nature of evangelism. I want you to hear it from Ray's perspective. Here he was at university, feeling alone, isolated, without community, and people who he thought were his friends were making that friendship contingent upon signing off on a belief system. So that is the brunt of the criticism you're going to hear today. We've had a number of people on the podcast who are not necessarily atheists, who are progressive believers or who are agnostic in one flavor or another. This is the first person I think I've had on, however, who has a very direct metaphysical perspective that is not one that I share. So I want to apologize to Ray for making him jump through a bunch of hoops while I went through the mental gymnastics to decide that this was a valuable conversation to share with you. I do think this is a valuable conversation to share with you. Here is my conversation with Ray Gilford. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Ray, thank you for reaching out to me. It sounds like you have an interesting story to tell. So what I'd like to hear first is, what was your experience with religion to begin with? Like, what was your faith tradition growing up?
Well, the short version of that is I had a secular, deistic if we could call it that,
Okay.
upbringing around a Christian family.
Uh-huh.
And here's how that worked out. My grandfather, my mom's dad, was a Baptist minister.
Okay.
So instead of being a PK, I'm a PGK, preacher's grandkid.
Okay. Yeah.
But they didn't make a huge effort to take me to or involve me in church.
Okay.
I don't know why. My grandparents, with those, my mom's parents, we lived in their house for up until I was about 6, and their pastor at the time lived next door,
Mm-hmm.
and went they went to church. They got there about once or twice a month, maybe, and even some days when they would go, I'd be home with my dad or with my mom and dad.
Okay.
And so as I look back, I probably, as a child, attended a dozen times actual services.
Right.
I went to more funerals than I did church services growing
Okay.
up.
You were the grandchild of believers, but you only went to maybe 12 services within your childhood.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess around the time I was 14 or so, I started to kind of have a sense that there was more to existence, reality, or whatever than just me and my family and what we were doing and the stuff that was going on the news and my friends.
Right.
And so we had moved to Southern California because my dad got a job out there. And one of my neighbors introduced me to metaphysics.
Okay.
And so I learned when I was 15, I learned to meditate.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 57, so this was back in 1978.
Okay.
At the same time, Christians, I kind of got on their radar for whatever reason. I kind of feel like they just kind of felt like I had passed the age of accountability and it was time.
Right.
So
Yeah.
this guy, he was a realtor, and I went in his office and we were talking, and I wasn't thinking that I was dealing with anybody with some kind of agenda. This is just a conversation, and all of
Right.
a sudden, out of the blue, it was on nothing spiritual, and then out of the blue, he says, "Well, Raymond, have you ever prayed to ask Jesus to save you from your sins?"
Mm-hmm.
And because I really didn't know what a sin was, because whenever I would do something wrong, my family, the adults, they didn't bring up God.
Right.
They said, I had lied to them, or I had done this or done that they told me not to do, or I hadn't done something that they told me to do. And there wasn't anything about offending God or sin uh, or hell or any of that kind of talk those words never came up
Right.
while I was growing up. So I just looked at the guy and I said, well, no, I don't think I've really done anything or been in that much trouble.
Right.
And so he led me through the quote unquote sinner's prayer, but I wasn't accepting it. I wasn't receiving it then. And so I continued in my kind of meandering in a little bit of occult topics and metaphysics and meditation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in Austin, Texas. I ended up moving back, graduated high school and started college. And that's where I ran into Campus Crusade for Christ.
Okay.
And so I can't think of the name of the author, but he said, there's nothing so absurd, but that if you repeat it often enough, people will believe it.
Yeah.
And the flip side to that is there's nothing so absurd that if you hear it repeated often enough, you'll begin to believe it.
Yeah.
And I lost the debate. ran out of I ran out of stuff to say. I couldn't.
Right.
There's nothing I was going to be able to say to convince these guys that the world, me, everybody, we're probably going to be okay.
Yeah.
Which is kind of my perspective. I've never had any kind of a sense of urgency about the end of the world or people going to hell. I didn't have any of that growing up.
Right.
I learned that being in churches.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so after a couple of years, I sat down with the little Campus Crusade tract, and next to the last page, there's the sinner's prayer, and I prayed the prayer, and I became a Christian. I converted
Okay.
and started trying to navigate those waters. But
Can I jump in with a question
yeah,
here? I thought it was
sure.
really eloquent what you said, that you kind of ran out of responses. Were the Campus Crusade for Christ people just so persistent that they kept coming to you again and again, and they basically were they putting the burden on you to defend why you didn't think you needed Christianity and that kind of thing?
Um, well, there are several tactics. I'm
Yeah,
calling them tactics because I'll explain why. Uh, One guy said that we were a lot of it centered around the gymnasium on
yeah,
campus. We were working out together, and that's where these conversations were happening.
okay,
And then from that, I started meeting with some of the guys on the student union and other places, and they started inviting me to. Well, there was a girl that I
yeah.
was
There's always a
quite
girl.
yeah, and I I went to my first meeting with the crusade meeting with her, and between it's probably about 15 different people
Hmm.
total. Uh, was I would bump into people or I'd talk to them after the crusade meeting was over or something, and we'd have these discussions, and they'd say, "Well, so how long have you been a Christian?"
Right.
Because they at first they assumed I was a Christian because I kept hanging out.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
kept
Okay. All right.
I and so then I'd say I wasn't, and then that would start a whole other start the conversation down a whole other track,
Sure.
and I wasn't equipped to deal with. It was just me. I didn't have any backup other than the friend, the neighbor in California. He was the only one person that I was really talking to about occult, esoteric, metaphysical stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
Even though I did attend a metaphysical church during that time for a bit, but I didn't have the community on campus right there to lean on.
Right.
They did. Also, I wasn't raised in any of these things, including the stuff I was into, and so I didn't have these years of training to fall on.
Right.
And so, and I wasn't going by one specific book and all that. So I was um, just not able to really withstand the, I guess we'd call it onslaught.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but this one guy, to get back to what I'm talking about when I say tactics, this guy said the only way for us to really be friends was for me to get saved.
Wow.
That we just there was kind of we were kind of friends light, I guess you could say. We were kind of
Okay.
um, it was it was kind of I didn't really until years later I didn't really think about just how that really just sucked. Though
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I was being friendship evangelized
Yeah.
there.
And I imagine
That,
that you're on campus and away from family, and you mentioned you didn't have, like a supportive community, so you're maybe lonely. You need friendship, and so here's somebody who's, potentially a friend, and they're saying, "I'm only going to be your friend if you do this thing for me."
pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I would run into we with like the director of of Campus Crusade for UT Austin would position himself in certain spots that were high traffic, but then he would if you ran into him, then well, of course, God brought you together.
Right. Right.
Okay,
Yes.
and so
Yeah.
um, it's kind of like okay, so God led the coyote into the trap that he's caught in right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would try to talk to him, and he was praying. Everybody was, of course, that's the other thing. Everybody was praying for me. I kept hearing that all the time. And he would he said he was praying because he was praying for God to break up this what he said I was under some kind of mind control.
Hmm.
So it was just I was felt like looking back, it feels like I was dealing with a bunch of door-to-door salesmen,
Right. Right.
and they wouldn't without me being just getting really nasty, they weren't going to take no for an answer. It wasn't there's no way for me to still hang out and for them to take no for an answer.
Right. Right.
So it was just I was always searching, and I I got a hold of was it Garner Ted Armstrong's Plain Truth magazine, a copy of that
Okay. Yeah.
used to be at the airport, and there's this whole section on Revelation, and it was talking about it almost sounded like science fiction the way he was
Right.
describing all these different things, and I started thinking, well, I really haven't given this a shot, and yeah, I understand it's supposed to be a one-way trip, and so I said, well, let's go into it, and maybe I'll find what I'm looking for in that.
Yeah.
And so I prayed the prayer and started talking to everybody as
Yeah.
one of them now. And
Can I ask just a couple of questions
yeah,
there? Like,
sure,
did
sure.
you have a sense of God as something external to yourself, or do you think you were really just bowing to the expectations that you say that you did this thing?
There were a few things that I noticed, and don't really have an answer for why they happened this way, but I would I was feeling up until that point, I was feeling a lot of anxiety,
Okay.
and that seemed to get better after I said the prayer.
Right.
That
Okay.
that that seemed to get better, and I don't know why that is. Why the anxiety started and why went away. I assumed at the time, well, that was God was pulling that pressure off because I surrendered.
I see. Okay.
And so it was really kind of hard to figure out those kinds of things. There were a few times when I felt a not so much a like an extra entity in the space in the room or whatever, but
Hmm.
where I felt a connection to something beyond.
Sure.
But even when I went to a Pentecostal church, I didn't the tongues didn't just take off like it
Right.
like I was told it was supposed to.
Yeah.
I was a member of 7 different congregations over a 32-year period,
Okay.
covering about 4 or 5 denominations,
Yeah.
with some of those not being in denial of actually being denominations.
Right. Right.
So, and I've been baptized 3 different times.
Okay.
So I got baptized at my mom's church, which is a Baptist church here,
Okay.
under the National Baptist Association as opposed to Southern Baptist.
Okay.
And about 2 weeks later, a guy came into my job, and he says, Ray, you need to get the Holy Ghost, because those are really the only people that are going up. And so this was another. I was always open to new experiences, and this sounded like this is something that's another piece of this pie
Hmm.
that I wanted to understand what it was, and all. But then I get there, and they have the altar call, and so I go down there, and there's probably 7 or 8 people with hands on me saying "speak," and it just wasn't coming out. It just
Sure.
wasn't this
Yeah.
whatever case of possession, and it just didn't take off. I
Yeah.
just kind of learned to babble along with everybody else
Right.
is there, and then I had some problems with some of the doctrine that they were saying to people.
Yeah.
They were going around telling people that they were going to hell for not speaking in tongues, and I just had a real problem with that, and so
Right.
I eventually left there, and I went to a conservative evangelical fundamentalist church where I was for several years.
Okay. All right. It's interesting. I think reflecting back on, I also not grew up. My first real church experience was in a Pentecostal church, and uh, had somewhat similar experience of the expectations that you speak in tongues are very, very heavy. And I'm quite the introvert, so I was definitely not willing to just do that in public. And what I found was, in my car by myself, And it was, basically just giving myself permission to speak gobbledygook, to not, you know what I mean? For it not to do. I volitionally made the decision. All right, I'm going to enunciate these sounds, right? And at the time, I took that to mean God's presence and something powerful taking place. In fact, I cried. It was a moving experience, but particularly with a number of years of reflection, I realized that I just, opened my mouth and started making sounds, and that it's that pressure that a Pentecostal church can put on a person, and then, hallelujah, you're speaking in tongues. So
Yeah, it was interesting. There were things that they were doing that, like we'd have this. I went to one of their street ministry with one of the street teams one Friday evening, and we were having this prayer before we left the church building. And the woman that was leading the prayer said, let us be of one mind and one accord. And I actually, my thought right then was no.
Okay.
And I was kind of, I definitely didn't want to say that out loud. And I thought that there was something wrong, that I was in the wrong for feeling that.
Right.
Because I thought we were all supposed to be this kind of sort of cohesive unit. But I didn't understand what she meant by that, and it sounded like some kind of hive mind.
Okay.
Which I couldn't. The concept, or at least, and I didn't talk to anybody about it, so I don't know what part of it I had wrong. But it just was just didn't sit well with me.
Right,
or
right.
as they say, you could kind of say I had a check in my spirit.
Yeah. Yes.
But, so we went down to the street along by the UT campus and handed out tracts and talked to a few people. And there was another group of people that had been part of that church, and they'd broken away and started their own little street ministry. And then they're getting up in our face about stuff. And it's like, we weren't really presenting a very good picture for these supposedly lost people.
Right.
That we're trying to read, because we're having an argument in front of them when we're both supposed to be trying to, in our own ways, present this message.
Right.
So it was interesting, but I didn't go back to that because I'm not a sales person.
Right.
I'd rather be flipping switches and doing things in the background.
Yeah. Yeah.
So from there, I moved back to California, and I ended up at Church on the Way, Jack Hayford's church.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
In Van Nuys. And so that's where I ran into deliverance and spiritual warfare.
Interesting.
And so I don't know about everybody else, but I developed an anxiety that became uncomfortable for me. I was just looking at everything. There was demons everywhere.
Right.
Right. And the funny thing about the way that my concept of demons was kind of the way cockroaches operate in real life.
Yeah.
Because it was like if you lifted up a rug, out comes a demon. That was the way.
Yeah.
It was like a minefield. You couldn't, even if you cleared up things in your life from whatever particular sin, and a lot of it was centered around sex, sexual sins. Then, you say, okay, well, it's clean. Well, you can't step out for half a minute before some improper thought, or you see something and think something, and you're right back there trying to repent again.
Right. Yes.
And it just it could drive you crazy.
Right.
And I eventually just stopped going, and I kind of did what I called putting the demons in perspective. And so I said, okay, well, they're not, this isn't just so prevalent where it's just every lift up every placemat at this kitchen table kind of thing. This has got to be something more extreme.
Yeah.
And because that was the only way I could deal with it, because I was wanting to accuse people of being possessed.
Right.
My aunt, I said that to her, and it hurt her feelings.
Yeah.
And I tried to cover for it, saying, "Well, we've all got demons. We're all possessed." And I
Yeah.
didn't understand that, you could have just kept your mouth shut. It
Yes.
didn't. Um, and so I came back to Austin a couple years later, and went back to that fundamentalist church.
Okay.
And during all this time, I was a Republican.
Okay.
So there was kind of this several couple of things that I broke away from. The first thing was the Republican Party,
Okay. And what time
and
was
then
this? When did that
this
happen? Like,
that was, well, when I actually just looked at, it was the Gulf, the Iraq War.
okay.
I just looked at, okay, I didn't sign on for this, and I started pulling away from the Republican Party. Getting rid of conservatism is a bit harder.
Okay.
Was a bit harder,
Yeah.
and took several more years. And years later, I wasn't a Republican. I was still looking at things through that lens.
Interesting. Okay.
So then it was around 2016. Not actually 2014. I got into an argument with someone on Facebook. I know that never happens. That's rare.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Never heard of that before.
And it was over school prayer. There was a meme circulating of, it said, if we don't take back the country, this is what's going to happen. It was a mosque. It looked like in a more of a European country.
Right. Okay.
And so there were a bunch of Caucasian kids with rugs kneeling in prayer.
Yeah.
And so I kind of felt like they specifically picked that one. So it looked like it was going to be a white people here
Hmm.
forced into a Muslim setting.
Right.
I just said, what I typed in the comments was, if God wants a theocracy, he needs to come down here and run it himself, because humanity is incompetent.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
an old college friend who had stayed consistent and faithful and conservative throughout the whole 30 years or so said that I sounded like a liberal, and that the things I was saying were designed to inhibit people of biblical faith from having
Mm.
greater access to the culture. And I looked at what he said, and I said out loud, I don't have biblical faith.
Mm. Okay.
And it was, people talk about, haven't had a out of body experience the way that they show it on TV,
Right.
but it was kind of like I jumped next to myself and just said, what the hell did you just say?
Yes. Yes.
And so instead of running to church to talk about it, I just said, okay, I don't have biblical faith. What does that look like now?
Okay.
And the first thing is, well, you can't quit, because you'll go to hell.
Mm.
And at that time, I was at my last spot, which was the Eastern Orthodox Church.
That's quite a change. Okay.
Yeah, I went that I had joined there in 2005.
Okay.
So, but instead of going to my priest at the time and saying, "Hey, I've got this. This is what's going on," I just sat with it and said, "Okay, so what does that look like?" And I just kind of ignored the hell portion of it.
Yeah.
And even we started moving into 2015, and when Easter service, Pascha, uh, you have to go to confession
Okay.
in order to be able to have communion at the service. And so I went to confession, and I told him that I'm having a crisis of faith, and I quoted the man in the New Testament who said, I want to believe. Help me with my unbelief.
Yeah.
And I told him that I would come and talk to him after the things, because there's just no office hours with the priest during that whole Lent period. It's
Sure.
just
Sure.
they're
Sure.
just busy
Yeah.
with just hearing confession and all that and preparation. But then I still didn't do that. I just kept on kind of the same path. And then I guess it was August of 2016 when I went on YouTube and I just said, I don't believe anymore.
Mm.
I don't accept the message anymore.
Yeah.
And at the time, at that same time, I had started trying to return to the metaphysics that I had left behind all those years before.
Okay.
But what I've come to realize is there's no, it's not like a path and there's like a fork in the road and you go down a certain length and then you decide, oh, well, you know what, let's go down that other side and see what's there. And so you come back and then you go down this other trail. I wasn't, the trailhead was different.
Right. Right.
I
Yeah.
because I wasn't the 15-year-old kid just starting out, and I'd had even though I hadn't I put all those things, I pushed them aside and even tried to entertain the idea of him being demonic or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Although that didn't really, I don't think that really stuck very
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
That I because I was being encouraged to not meditate. Prayer was more important than meditation,
Right.
and the meditating on the word, that wasn't explained very well, among several other things that weren't explained very well to me. And
Yes.
the thing is, as a Christian, I wanted more, and I wanted something deeper. So I
Yeah.
started learning. I started out with Greek because I thought couldn't really put my finger on what it was that wasn't enough. But I
Yeah.
thought, well, maybe what I'm looking for is in the original languages. And so I started learning Greek, and then I started learning Hebrew. And ended up changing my major to
Yeah.
Hebrew.
Okay.
And I still wasn't really finding. Part of me sometimes thinks that maybe if I'd stayed in grad school and finished the master's and gone on towards the PhD, maybe the deep part that I was digging for, I might have found something.
Yeah.
But we were still, even with the interlinear Bible texts and the dictionaries and the codex and all that, with
Yeah.
all those tools, I was still coming back to the say a version of the same King James understanding of the text.
Right.
And part of me just didn't really want that. I felt like there was more meaning, but I wasn't finding it, and I wasn't going to find it really talking to, if we could use a little Harry Potter language,
Yeah.
talking to muggles
Yeah.
all the time.
Okay. So
I
muggles. Wait. Let me make sure you define that. Muggles being believers or non-believers,
muggles,
or
that's
educated or not educated.
well, that's muggles in this context means believers who are satisfied with just the Sunday school,
Ah.
Sunday sermon explanations of things.
Okay.
Or as the people you may see people on social media using the word basic as in kind of
Yes.
as an insult.
Yes.
I really didn't relate very well with my fellow parishioners, my fellow church members.
Yeah.
The people that I could really relate to were the clergy. But this was, in a lot of cases, this was evangelical circles, and the ministers weren't really, they talk to you for a little while, but they really want to get back to chasing down souls and winning souls.
Right. Right.
Maybe the thing was I should have just become a one of those perpetual students at a seminary somewhere. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
uh,
You know what I'm relating to a lot here. I actually wrote a blog post called "I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For" in reference to the U2 song, and what I'm trying to capture in that is that, you know, when I was in Bible college, one of the things that was deeply fulfilling was staying up till 3 a.m, having these deep conversations, and it wasn't necessarily that the conversations happen to be theological. It's that you're having a conversation about important things. And that after leaving school, leaving college, I realized that not everybody wants to do that, you know, including, like you're mentioning, some of the clergy. And so I think part of what is important for us post deconstruction, post deconversion, you find that you are that type of person, is finding each other. Like we are we are still interested in these deep questions. And even though we may not know the answers to those questions, the discussion, the interaction, the debate, the working through the process is valuable and meaning making in my opinion.
well, I mean, I had a friend that he would get offended. You'd ask him a question and he'd give you his answer for it. But then if he noticed that you were still scratching around trying to find an answer to that same
Yeah.
question, he'd get offended. It's like, well, I gave you the answer. No, I asked you what you thought. You told me what you thought, and I'm not done.
Right.
Turning like supposedly Leonardo da Vinci would turn the manuscript upside down and write upside down, and he would draw upside down and look at things from all sorts of different angles and
Right.
inside out and whatever he could to see it better. And so yeah, I asked you how this or that, and thank you for your answer, but I'm still trying to figure out what like one of my questions about the stories in the Old Testament was the Tower of Babel.
Mm-hmm.
Just what was going on that we see all these ancient structures that and this one thing annoys God to the point that he's got to doesn't come down and knock the block over, knock the structure over, comes down and disperses the people by confounding their languages.
Yeah.
And I was okay. So and he also says if they complete what they're doing, nothing will be impossible to them. And I wanted to know, okay, so what was going on here? Because this sounds like more than another big construction project.
Right.
And how tall was it? Because with our machines, we've only mechanical and technology, we've only gotten so far in modern times as far as building heights. If you just look at Dubai,
Sure,
where the really tall skyscrapers are. So I asked my pastor at the time, and he said, "What does it matter?"
Hmm.
And those are the kind of things I was wanting to dig into into the text, into commentaries and the original languages, and if there was a beyond that to find out what was going on here, because it's just kind of a real rough sketch, and
Sure.
then they move on. And those were the things that fascinated me about the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really have a burden for people and looking at lost souls, because that wasn't how I was raised.
Okay.
My family, people might look at them. I mean, it's just my mom still with me now.
Okay.
But people might look at who they were back 50 years ago and say, well, they were just nominal Christians. But that was the Christianity that I came to know.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I don't look at them as what they were doing was wrong or that they raised me wrong. That was who they were, and they had a hope and an expectation just as strong and just as valid as anybody else I've ever met.
Right.
And so, I've heard ministers talk about having just a really bad anxiety attacks over the rapture
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
over the end times. My family, they just let me be a kid. They just,
Yes. Yeah.
and so I'm grateful for that, because when I think about just the nervous stress behaviors that children have that actually have active physical abuse going on
Mm.
in homes, that the response in the body and all is no different when it's a religious trauma like that.
Right.
And so I'm thankful that I didn't grow up with worrying about all that.
Yeah.
And Penn Jillette, he was having a conversation with Ray Comfort, and he said to him that he wanted to tell. At least this is not word for word. This is just my
Sure.
my memory of the video, but that he wanted to say to a lot of Christians that he had been around, that, wow, you must have really hated me to withhold that from me. Why didn't you tackle me?
Mm.
And if there was that much at stake.
Right.
And I just want to say, I hadn't hated anybody. I just wasn't that worried about them.
Yeah. 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 No, I understand.
It just, it just, I wasn't worried about, I mean, the as that when I was 15 or 16 years old, the rapture stuff could have happened, and we wouldn't have had a clue, other than there have been some people missing.
Yeah.
It would have probably taken longer for me to figure out that, oh, this is what's going on.
Mm.
Um,
Let's
yeah.
circle back for just a second. I want to get back to so you have a moment in time, you recognize that you no longer have a biblical faith. You go to your priest eventually and have that confession time that has lingered for, it's not going away. What did you decide to do with that at that point in time?
Well, I posted that video, and I put a link on my Facebook page,
Okay.
and my priest saw that, as a lot of people saw that, and so I got a lot of sad emoji, sad reaction or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry to interrupt you one more time. The video, maybe did I miss what was the video about?
Yeah, I posted a video where it said that I didn't believe anymore.
I see. Okay, got it.
So I posted that, and so I decided to go back to. I started back meditating, and
Okay.
I started back looking into metaphysical subjects, and decided to just. I didn't want. It wasn't that I didn't want to believe in God. It's more that I didn't believe in the people.
Right.
It hasn't been, the problem hasn't been Jesus. The problem has been the people. When I started seeing what I call a money grubbing genocidal nationalism amongst a lot of people, wanting to just turn whole nations into glass. I heard people say that, and
right.
I don't know what God they think they're serving here, but I don't want any part of it.
Right.
And that's not what I was presented with. That's not what the Bible presents, especially in the New Testament. And so that's what I was more leaving, was Christians, not Christianity so much.
Sure. Yeah.
But I decided, because I also had a few paranormal experiences.
Okay.
Over the years, and now that coming from my background of my time at church on the way, I would have been trained to assume that everything was demons. Okay.
Right.
But I just decided, okay, no, I'm not gonna just assume that I don't know what these are, but I'm not gonna just assume it's all demons.
Yeah.
And so I didn't do where some people would have gone through and tried to do a house cleansing rituals and things like that. I didn't do anything about it. I
Okay.
just, I other than make notes in a journal
Yeah.
when these things would happen. And so I, that's part of another part of the things I'm exploring is trying to learn about at least our understanding of the spirit realm,
Okay.
and not assuming that these are all hallucinations.
Okay. Yeah, I want to just state on the record here. I was honest with you that I think this is where you and I have a fair amount of daylight between us. I'm definitely a metaphysical naturalist. So I want to hear you describe this. I just want to make it clear that this is a difference between us. So what is your metaphysics, and how do you experience that?
Well, I mean, as far as the things like an afterlife, I have no proof. I hope that there is something beyond this. I like I lost my dad 2 years ago, and
Yeah,
I hope to see him again, but I don't say I know it.
I see.
Um, it's kind of as far as that, I don't make knowledge claims, uh, even about paranormal stuff that happens from time to time.
Yeah.
Um, I don't make knowledge claims about it because I don't know if yeah, I can't see it, so I don't know what it is. Um, but I'm not willing to just assume it's hallucinations, which was kind of from watching a couple of Dawkins videos. That's kind of his perspective on a
Yeah.
lot of these things. I just assume I don't assume it's all hallucinations, and I don't assume that it's all a it's not all hallucinations, and it's not all demons.
Sure.
There's a I don't really see those two as at extreme ends of a spectrum, but I just want to say there's more. I feel like there's more there. There's
Okay.
more to there's more to the world and to existence and to the universe than we've figured out. So I'm allowing for there to be something there.
Okay.
It's kind of I want to say I have more of a deistic perspective on, which is was kind of my go all in the beginning was my understanding of God
Okay.
was more deistic. I believe there was something there. And could you maybe expand on when you say metaphysics, how maybe wait with
Yeah.
your
Yeah. So again, I'm in anticipation of this conversation. I'm not one of those hardcore atheists like Dawkins, and I'm gonna yell and debate and argue. Part of my deconversion was the sudden realization that, in fact, literally the day of, I was reading a number of blog posts from Greta Christina about the soul, the concept of the soul, and she was pointing out that there's, you know, a physical nature to that. If you hit somebody over the head, they are unconscious. If if in certain brain injuries, the person's personality can change, and it gave me the moment to recognize that I am my body and my body is me. I do not believe that there is a soul, that there's something spiritual or non-physical. I would even go so far as to say, I'm extreme in this, in the sense I would even go so far as to say that I believe consciousness is brain states, right? So that's how far I would go with it. Why that was meaningful or helpful for me is that the a part of letting go of Christianity was letting go of things that I had no evidence for. I could say, so in other words, many people go through a deconstruction process and they kind of, they stop being maybe an evangelical Christian and they start going to more liberal Christian environments, and they see the resurrection as metaphorical or what have you. And I needed it to be either real or not real, right? And so in that couple of moments, it was like, I can my epistemology, way of knowing things, my method of knowing things can be about how much I value evidence. And things that I don't feel have enough evidence for, I don't have any obligation to believe them, right? And now again, I have a really good friend of mine, really good friend, who is very much like, first of all, he's a believer, but also, you know, believes that there are UFOs, believes that, Bigfoot is a real thing, a number of things that I would seriously disagree with him on, right? And we have these conversations, and believes that an angel saved him from falling while he was rock climbing, things of those nature. I think that there are natural explanations for all of those things, including weird experiences that I've had personally, where I can, with psychology, with the knowledge that we have about our ability to kind of fool ourselves to or to or interpret, not even fool, but to interpret something as being external to ourselves. That's kind of where I land. So
Well, when I when I decided that I wasn't going back,
yeah.
and when I thought about there were several big things like the afterlife and heaven or whatever, heaven, hell, and those sorts of things. The concepts of heaven that had been fed sounded like a big resort and or a perpetual church service.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And I felt like, okay, well, I'm in favor of an afterlife,
Hmm.
but I don't want to be just stuck somewhere with this same group of people where every day is Sunday. And
Right.
that's what people were presenting, because that's kind of uh, where they stop. They feel like, their worship time is heaven.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really a big fan of, even though I would become a member of these groups. I wasn't really a big fan of the church service. In fact, I pretty much hold the unofficial record of non-attendance.
Yeah. Yes.
I'd go I'd go kind of in bursts. I'd go for a little while, then I'd stop, and sometimes it would be a year between me showing up for a service. And much to the annoyance of some people at those places. So I've always had a love for the stars
Hmm.
and the night sky and astronomy. And so if there's anywhere to go, me personally, I just want to head to the stars. I don't want to go to this place
Yeah.
over here off. And so I don't have any evidence for any of these things. I have a hope, and I don't feel like I personally need to have evidence
Right.
to believe, but I don't make knowledge claims. I don't go and tell people, well, that this is what it's like, and if you do or don't do this or that, you are going to make it or you're not going to make it. I don't tell people where they're going to have to go or what they have to do when they get there.
Yeah.
It's just, that's kind of where I am with that. And I guess it's part of me that's kind of what I wanted when I was in the church.
Yeah.
But when you're in conservative evangelical circles, we're encouraged to distrust progressive Christianity.
Yeah. Yes.
That was those
It's an understatement.
those people were, they were playing the fire and all that. So that wasn't my first place I was headed. Even when I was becoming disillusioned with the evangelicals, I didn't think, okay, well, let me go over here and find someone in this denomination or that denomination, because that was taboo. I was encouraged and trained to look with fear and disdain at those
Hmm.
people.
Yeah.
And so my converting to Eastern Orthodoxy, that was rebellion against evangelicalism,
Sure. Yeah.
because they have a problem with that too.
Yeah.
And so it's I guess I've been trying to be, I've tried to be just open to the possibilities. And I personally don't have to have hard evidence.
Hmm.
Um, and there's a lot of it. We don't have the technology, and I don't even know if technology could be developed to measure, like when people say that they feel energy from certain objects, from certain crystals, things like that. The ghost hunter guys try, but it only works, it only goes so far. And so I don't know if we're ever going to get to where we have empirical evidence the way we do for, say, for physics, for chemistry, for and to develop technologies from that, from engineering. I don't know if we're going to be able to do that with metaphysical, what we call spiritual things. And I don't know if that's really necessary, as I feel like it would take away some of the intuitiveness of it.
Mm. Okay.
If there were some sort of instrument that could actually measure, we see people get photographs of their auras, but that's and even like Kirlian photography, but that's just one thing, and not everybody can reproduce those kinds of experiments. And so to say, I'm not going to say it's not valid. I'm just saying that there's just a lot that we don't know about about the reality around us. And you can't, as far as the afterlife, you can't go by near-death experiences, because at least from the little bit of perusal that I've done, they're all different. The testimonies are, they come back. You can go on the YouTube and look up the Reverend Howard Storm and several other people, and they have a very negative experience during their near-death experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then you can go and look up someone like Dannion Brinkley, and it came back with a more New Age sounding testimony about what happened in the near-death experience. And if it's all coming from one monolithic source, then I would expect to have that people would come back with testimony that we're all depending on that source. And what I mean by that is, I wouldn't expect to have Howard Storm saying that he was about to be pulled into, if he hadn't been revived, if he'd stayed dead and kept stayed with these entities that he was seeing, that he was going to end up in hell. And I wouldn't, to have that, and then over here, Dannion Brinkley, it sounds like this other stuff didn't exist. So I would what I would expect to find is all of the testimonies corresponding with the Bible, and they don't.
Right.
So I have I guess for me, like I said, I don't need to have everything, to have evidence for everything, and I'm okay with that, and I'm okay with the folks that do. It's just it's a different way of looking at it. I mean, my dad took me up flying when I was 3 years old. Mm-hmm. The kinds of things that he shared with me were the things that fascinated him about the world, and that opened up my head at a really early age. And I was on a steady diet of science fiction, of Star Trek, Star Wars, and all that growing up. And so that made it hard to just kind of be satisfied with the fare in churches.
Right.
It just, I was always looking for more. It's like, okay, that's nice. What else? That's nice. What's beyond that?
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I guess you could say I've probably been in some sort of a rabbit hole all my life, really.
So let me ask you just the last question here. I'm afraid I'm running out of time here. Okay. For people who are, in the midst of it all and maybe starting to have some doubts and they're looking for more, do you have advice for them? What should they be doing?
Well, I guess part of it depends on how important the community is to them. And because if they start doubt and dealing with doubts, that makes people uncomfortable, especially if it doesn't look like you're resolving those issues and coming back to the same body of knowledge that they're involved in. My advice or suggestions: if you have someone who's questioning and you don't have the answers, help them find it. Help them find people that that do, rather than trying to just make them shut up and have faith,
Yes.
because
Well said.
that's not useful, because that's what I wish I had years ago, and not had to try to dig through things on my own all the time. As far as the advice, if you try to suppress the doubts, it's just gonna pop up in another spot again. It's like suppressing anything, suppressing anger, things like that. So I would say you've got to make the space for yourself to be able to sit with the doubts. Whether you come to the conclusion that let's say it's about inerrancy, well, I would say look at things like what the process of copying text looked like for the scribes, the things that they went through, the things that they had to deal with, the fact that, let's say in Hebrew, since there are no vowels and no capital letters, you went by the vowel points. And there were a lot of times when the scribes were dealing with an unpointed text, a text that just had letters. And sometimes they would get the wrong word when they're when they're translating from Hebrew to Greek in the case of the Septuagint. And understanding that it's not like, one of the things I'll make this real quick. So I guess around 86, I taught a Sunday school class. We went over a few of the minor prophets, Amos, Obadiah, and a couple others during this 3-month period. And there was a verse that was picked up in the New Testament, and they moved a comma, and it basically swapped the object and subject in the sentence. It didn't really change the meaning that much. And I tried to explain this to my Sunday school class, and this was we ended up in one of those proverbial pin drop moments.
Yeah.
And if I had, because one of the ladies there, she just looked at me and she said, "Well, we believe that the Word of God is inerrant."
Yeah.
And I had to just drop it. I just had to let that go, and we just moved on, because if not, I probably could have ended up getting kicked out of the class I was teaching. I mean, I would have had to go talk to the pastor, who would understand what I was talking about and might on some level agree with me. But there was, what I found from my classes was that there were a lot of things that people go over in Bible college and seminary that never get brought up in church. And so this is one part of it. Just you have to be able to let go of certain sacred cattle doctrines. Like if you're got questions about the text, at least entertain the idea that the inerrancy doctrine is not this holy thing that needs to be protected at all times. Because in my classes, Hebrew classes, we were looking at these things from the standpoint of a linguist, not like we were trying to protect this doctrine. And I went to one of my professors, who is a Baptist minister, and I showed him the text, and I said, "This is what the Septuagint's saying, and this is I can't. I'm getting this drunken razor versus a hired razor because of the letters." And he looked at it and he said, "Oh, well, the scribe was dealing with an unpointed text, and he just wrote down. He picked up he put up the word for drunk instead of the word for to hire, and so it looks like they're sending a drunken barber to shave you." Okay, and he said, and that's what the problem was, and it's no big deal. Well, trying to explain all that in Sunday school class with people who are looking at it from the standpoint that it's inerrant, whatever that actually means.
Right.
So to wrap that up, dealing with doubts is depend on the kind of doubt. You just have to look at if there are doctrines that are underpinning the thing. You may have to experiment with it, take the undercarriage away, and see how it holds up without the support of the fervently held beliefs.
Right.
And you might not, that's the problem, is you might not have people you can talk to. And that's frustrating. That's hard. Is
Yeah.
we're not having who aren't who aren't willing to sit with you while you're who are going to throw things out at you like, well, God isn't the author of your confusion, things that are not really useful. I would say try to find those folks if you can, but there's a way of kind of tinkering with the doubt to feel like, so you can figure out if it can hold up on, if there's really if it's just a difference of opinion, if it's a difference of opinion between you and God, or is it a difference of opinion between you and some 14th, 15th, 12th, 3rd, 8th century minister? It's just, but then at some point you'll have to make a decision about, do I still believe this the way it's presented anymore?
Right.
And does it matter? And for some people, if you keep heading down that part of the rabbit trail, you may end up not being able to stay with the whole thing.
Right. Right.
I mean, that's part of what I guess what we call deconstruction, and it's not comfortable all the time. In fact, it's very depending on what the person is dealing with at the moment, it can be very uncomfortable.
Yeah. So, Ray, do you have anything do you have like a YouTube channel or anything you want to publicize? So
I've got a blog that I don't write on it as often as I need to. It's called galacticwanderlust.com.
Okay.
I'm working on another one called Gaslit Soul, but I haven't really done much with that. And that's kind of where I want to put my deconstruction post.
Okay.
But as far as my the things that fascinate me, and the things I get getting irritated with, pissed off about, and things like that, I post a lot of it at galacticwanderlust.com.
Great.
I'm not really doing much with YouTube these days. I got a few videos out there, but and there's these other, like TikTok. I haven't even downloaded it, which
Yeah, exactly.
depending on what goes on with the government, none of us may not be able to keep TikTok. But
that's right.
Yeah, they can find my stuff there. I've got an Instagram account under the same name.
Okay. Excellent. Fantastic.
Good.
Ray, thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Final thoughts on the episode. When you ask the question, am I the bad person in this conversation? I am in this case. I really made Ray jump through a bunch of hoops, again, as I went through some mental gymnastics. But I think you can hear in his story why I ultimately decided to share this conversation. Again, just listening to Ray, I think you will love him. He's such a good person. That's so obvious in the way that he speaks. Also to point out that it's not that Christianity has not been tried and tested. It's that Christianity fails to deliver for people who are fully dedicated to it. And even people who still believe in the supernatural, people who still have some level of agnosticism about an afterlife or miracles or the existence of a deity of any kind. Here we have someone who tried his hardest. He tried to go deeper. He tried to ask the people around him for more. He went and learned Hebrew. He learned Greek. He studied. And yet Christianity was found wanting. This is important to hear, that it isn't just about a metaphysical naturalist like myself arguing against the miracle claims of Christianity. The problem with Christianity is that it claims to have power to transform, to change people. And when you are trying to live that out and you find that there is no power that is transformative, first of all, you blame yourself rather than God in that case, but eventually you come to an honest point of view to recognize that it just is not true. I want to thank Ray for being on the podcast, for sharing his story and being the kind person that he is. He was much more graceful to me than I think I was to him. So again, my apologies. I am very glad to have shared this story with you, and I hope that you have gained something from hearing Ray's story. I'll mention here again that my wife Michelle and I are going to be recording a conversation about what it's like to be in a marriage with a deconvert and a believer. If you have some respectful questions that you would like to pose, please email me at gracefulatheist@gmail.com. Until then, my name is David, and I am trying to be the graceful atheist. Join me in being graceful human beings. Time for some footnotes. The song is a track called Waves by Micaiah Beats. Please check out her music. Links will be in the show notes. If you'd like to help support the podcast, here are the ways you can go about that. First, help promote it. The podcast audience grows by word of mouth. If you found it useful or just entertaining, please pass it on to your friends and family. Post about it on social media so that others can find it. Please rate and review the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. This will help raise the visibility of our show. Join me on the podcast. Tell your story. Have you gone through a faith transition? You want to tell that to the world? Let me know and let's have you on. Do you know someone who needs to tell their story? Let them know. Do you have criticisms about atheism or humanism, but you're willing to have an honesty contest with me? Come on the show. If you have a book or a blog that you want to promote, I'd like to hear from you. Also, you can contribute technical support. If you are good at graphic design, sound engineering, or marketing, please let me know and I'll let you know how you can participate. And finally, financial support. There will be a link on the show notes to allow contributions which would help defray the cost of producing the show. If you want to get in touch with me, you can Google Graceful Atheist, or you can send email to gracefulatheist@gmail.com. You can tweet at me at gracefulatheist, or you can just check out my website at gracefulatheist.wordpress.com. Get in touch and let me know if you appreciate the podcast. Well, this has been the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Grab somebody you love and tell them how much they mean to you. This has been the Graceful Atheist Podcast.